Welcome back. In this video, we will look at acoustic models and feature extraction and vocoding and how digital processing and sampling happens. Okay, so let's get crack-a-lackin'. I have slides from other people, figures from other people in this slideshow. So here we go. So let's review modeling the signal. So we have continuous speech, continuous sound pressure wave that hits a microphone, but we have to get discrete digital samples, or discretize, you might say, because there's an infinite number of points along this pressure wave, and we can't obviously look at an infinite number of points, so we have to discretize the continuous form and turn them into a binary signal, right? Sequences of zeros and ones. And this requires sampling at some interval and manipulating the samples in various ways. So down here at the bottom right let me on the fly do a little bit of editing if I move myself over here. Yeah, cool. Right here we have a sound. We have this sound that is being produced. But if we have too long of a sample time, I don't know if you can see the dots on this green line. There's a dot there, and anyway, there are dots here. The point here is that if you're sampling too slowly, then what comes out of your sample could look totally different from what the actual sound is. So this green line is what is coming out of the sample, but it's not at all what the red line is doing, the actual sound wave itself. Okay, let me put myself back here in my spot. Okay, so again, the idea I just want to point out is that the sampling rate is important. How often you sample is important to how well the digital audio file matches what was actually produced in the analog, continuous sample sound. Okay. So just to review, computing a spectrum, you have a waveform of some sound, like on the left-hand side here, which has time on the x-axis. This is time and amplitude, or like pressure of sound wave. And then on the right we have a spectrum, and on the x-axis we have frequency in hertz from 0 to 8,000 hertz. And we have sound pressure level here. Okay. And so you can see this is what is a spectrum. We saw this. And this happens through some type of Fourier transform, like a discrete Fourier transform or fast Fourier transform. Okay, so to compute what's called a spectrum right there. And you can see where the majority of the pressure is at what frequencies it's happening. By the way, a spectrum is different than a spectrogram. Don't confuse those two. A spectrogram has time on the x-axis, whereas a spectrum has frequency on the x-axis there. Okay, so sampling methods. There are various methods that can be used. Each sample is quantized to the nearest value within a range of steps. And so, for example, the most intuitive is what is called the pulse amplitude modulation. So up here on the top right of this screen, we have the pulse amplitude modulation, and at this sample we have a value of 3. So if we're looking at this solid dark wave right here, this is the actual sound that we're trying to sample. We're trying to digitize. At one sample we have a value of 3 right there, and at the next sample we have a value of 7. At the third sample we have a value of 3, and then we go below the origin, that is the 0 boundary, the 0 intercept. We go down to -3, and then at the fifth sample we have a value of -1. So the pulse amplitude modulation is tracking that. So these bars here, where my cursor is moving around, is basically trying to show this wave, the amplitude, right? There are other ways to do this. So like, for example, pulse and duration modulation is simply the duration, and the pulse position modulation there, and the PCM, or the pulse code modulation, is turning these samples into zeros and ones. And this is how digitization happens of sounds, for example, across the telephone network or anything really. This is how we digitize sounds these days. Okay. We don't need to worry about the others too much. The most relevant for us is this one, this PCM, pulse code modulation. Don't have to worry about the details too much. Just simply, it's important to just realize that that's what PCM stands for. You may see this abbreviation in various places dealing with sounds. And it refers to this method used to digitally represent sampled analog signals. It is the standard form of digital audio in computers and compact disc and digital telephony and other digital formats. Okay, so that's the most relevant for us. So why should we care about PCM or pulse code modulation? Like I mentioned, it's the standard these days. And Pratt can only play PCM encoded files. Now, Pratt uses this piece of software as a decoder to convert MP3 into this pulse code modulation file format. It uses this MPEG audio decoder library. Let me just show you real quick what that looks like. I get to it quickly here. Yeah, so this is a high quality MPEG audio decoder. It currently supports MPEG 1, MPEG 2, extension to lower sampling frequencies, as well as the de facto MPEG 2.5, good. All three audio layers, layer 1, 2, and 3, layer 3 is MP3, are fully implemented. So Pratt, underneath the hood, is using this little piece of software to pull MP3s in, and so you can use Pratt to analyze sounds. So there are different PCM audio formats. Probably the most common, some of the most common you'll hear are WAV and MP3, right? But there are others that are PCM, pulse code modulation again. And just to give you an example, let me just pull in Audacity. Let me go back to this other screen and pull Audacity over. Let's see if I can grab Audacity. How do I grab Audacity here? I want to move Audacity, but now, there we go. Okay. So here I have a little, what do I have here? Oh, I have a decoder. I have a vocoder. Let me put it back. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, testing 1, 2, 3, 4 is what I said, right? If you come up here and do export, hey, Audacity, export. It has the most common ones already here as like presets, MP3, WAV, or OGG, but you can just say export audio and look at all the formats that it can do. So AIFF is Apple's kind of proprietary PCM format. Here's MP3 and WAV. WAV is from Microsoft, and there are others here. There's MP2. Here is AAC, M4A, which is like the audio used with like iTunes and YouTube and others. And a lot of these, as you can see, actually use FFmpeg under the hood to do the conversion. And we've seen FFmpeg as this command line tool, right? That does a lot of cool stuff. And Audacity is actually using that under the hood to do a lot of these conversions itself. So let's jump back to here. Okay, so yeah, I have a list here of some of the PCM audio formats. The ones that are most common, that we're most used to, are WAV and MP3, and perhaps we've heard of some of these others. AAC is kind of more advanced and technical than MP3 and is used these days by, like I said, YouTube and iTunes. Okay, so wrappers exist to help store and access audio data in these formats. And lossless is like there's no loss of the data of the sound, whereas loss, like MP3, it's a lossy, which means it loses some of the sound, but it's usually above what humans can hear, so it's not a big deal to get rid of that part of the sound signal. Okay, so that's what PCM is. It's a way of digitizing analog sound into a digital format, and there are different kind of formats that you can save that. And again, there's the lossless ones like WAV and others have all the information there, whereas some of the lossy ones, let me rephrase that, the lossy ones lose some of that information of the sound signal. Okay, so encoding and decoding. A codec, short for encoding and decoding, is a computer program that does that, encodes and decodes audio data. And sound cards on computers and gaming stations, for example, have decoders, encoders and decoders, codecs. There are many available little pieces of software. Audacity, has one. Pratt. Anyway, any any program that deals with sound has a codec. And there are some that are kind of optimized for speech, human speech, that don't worry about sounds that are above what we can hear. And a vocoder is a codec for analyzing and synthesizing speech, and it like removes some of the data to like preserve most of it, but to make it different, to change it, and to make it sound synthesized and like robotic. And so that was what I just showed you a second ago. If I go back here, I'm back in Audacity, right? And I just have this little sound, testing 1, 2, 3, 4, that I recorded earlier. I go up to Effect and I go to Distortion and Modulation, Vocoder, and I need to select everything, so I'll do Command A, and then do Effect, Distort, Modulation, Vocoder, and then I'll just leave the default settings, and it does something to it. And if I listen to it now, it's kind of hard to hear, but it's what I just said, testing 1, 2, 3, 4. It's reduced, it's pulled out most of the data, but it's left some of the core in there, so you can kind of make out testing 1, 2, 3, 4. There are videos of vocoder songs. Do you recognize it? Let's groove tonight. Anyway, I have some links there. You can look at those. There's some greatest Spotify. I'm not complex. 50 greatest vocoder songs there. SoundSnap has some samples as well. Prepare to qualify, right? Anyway, so that's what vocoder is. It just sounds like synthesized stuff, just kind of modulating. But again, it's like pulling out a lot of the data of the sound and just keeping a little bit. And so that's what vocoders are. Another important process is pre-processing. And the idea is to get rid of as much non-speech noise in the signal as possible. Like I mentioned, humans can only hear up to a certain hertz, so there's no reason to have above that in there. Also, there's a step of pre-processing. The problem is that in a spectrum, the majority of the energy is concentrated in the lower end of the spectrum. And so a solution is to emphasize or amplify the higher frequency noises before going into a spectrum, calculating a spectrum. And also, another step in pre-processing is to do noise filtering, right? Getting rid of background noise, which can be done in Audacity, right? Manually. And then also the last one there, source separation or diarization. Sometimes you may see that. Basically splitting out each person's voice in a multi-party conversation where you have one audio for many different people, or at least, several people speaking. And let me show you an example here. If I come here to SpeechBrain, SpeechBrain is an audio toolkit made collaboratively, centered at or hosted at McGill University in Canada. So let me play this here. These are two instruments. Right, it sounds like a clarinet or maybe a saxophone, and something lower. I don't know, a tuba maybe, something lower. But here they use this signal separation or this source separation. Here's the first one. So they pulled out the lower instrument there, the tuba or something like the tuba. You can still hear a little bit of a glitch at each different note. There's a little bit of a glitch. You can hear a bit of the clarinet or the saxophone there. Here's the other one. Here's the original again. Anyways, the idea is that you can give software a sound signal, a file, and say, hey, there are two in here, pull them apart. And that's with musical instruments, but you can use speech, like human speech. I did this with my daughter. We were both speaking at the same time into the same microphone using just one track, a mono track, and had it separate our voices out. It did a pretty good job. So let's see, I'm going to go back to here. Okay. All right, so another important part of signal processing is windowing. The idea is that you have a continuous sound, an analog sound, right, that has an infinite number of points that you could look at and analyze at any given, infinite infinitesimal point along that sound. That's obviously not possible. So we have to divide it up into windows. And the way that is done can vary. And so there are different ways of doing that. The problem is that on the edges, on the boundaries of the window, you'll lose some information, or it won't be as nice and clear. So a way to deal with that is to have overlapping windows. So like down here in the bottom part of the screen of this slide, right? Let's say we have a window of like 30 milliseconds, and we move it 15 milliseconds during our analysis. So we first analyze the first 30 millisecond window, get information out of it, and then we move that window half step forward by 50 milliseconds and analyze the next window of the sound, and keep doing that. So that's the idea of windowing. And an important part of that is that when you do that, there are functions, the majority of which cause the sides of the little window, the 30 millisecond window, give or take, to be attenuated and go down to even 0 on the sides. And the reason is to not have the interference or the weirdness between the stop of one window and the start of the next one. And so that's what this handing windowing does, for example. It's so here's a speech signal, right? We pull out little windows and we attenuate or decrease the volume of the sides in a progressive way. Like it's kind of there are different ways to do it. There's like a rectangular way, which is cuts off the sides completely to 0. You have like a straight sound on the other parts, or you can have like a triangular way, or kind of a smooth, like parabolic way. So that's what's happening here with the handing window. So let me do a little demo here in Pratt just to show you what I'm talking about. Let me go get Pratt. If I go here and come here, let me just see if I can do a quick sound. New, record mono. Let's see if I do on this microphone in front of me. Testing 1, 2, 3. Good. Let me go look at it over here. Let me just play it real quick. Testing 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Let's zoom in on the S right there. That right there should be an S. Yeah, that's an S right there. Let me zoom in to just one part of the S. I'll just grab a middle part right in here, zoom in visually. Let me bump this up. So here I have how many milliseconds? I have 35 milliseconds of, and I can extract this out. Let me extract this out. Go over here, extract with windowed extraction. And brought it to this other screen. Let me bring it over to this screen. And so there are different types of windowing. So the rectangular just give me everything. The triangular, parabolic, there's a handing I saw on the slide, a Hamming, and various Gaussian ones. There's a Kaiser, 2 Kaisers. Let me just do the triangular one so you can see, or yeah, we'll do the triangular one and say go. And then if I look at this, I should have a slice there. And if I open and look at it, you can see that the sides are attenuated gradually, going out to the sides, right? So that's the idea. Let me just play this. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's the S sound. Let me play the original without any windowing. I don't know if you can hear, but there's a difference there in the amount of signal that comes out through this windowing. So that's just an example of what windowing is, and this happens with any analysis. Any analysis in Pratt, like getting formants, getting pitch, getting intensity, this windowing happens as it's going through and analyzing the sound. This windowing idea, okay. So that's what windowing is. So you may hear about handing windowing or Hamming windowing or Gaussian. The makers of Pratt highly encourage using Gaussian windowing rather than these more popular, or at least well-known ones of handing and Hamming. Anyway, it's kind of funny. I'll maybe try and find what they say exactly, but they're pretty funny. Like anyone uses Gaussian, not Hamming or handing. It's later in the evening and I found what I mentioned in the video, so I wanted to share it with you guys. They talk about the window shape here, the shape of the analysis window to compute that. Cool. You can choose from Gaussian, square, or rectangular, Hamming, Bartlett, parabolic, Welch, Hamming. They say the Gaussian window is superior as it gives no side lobes to your spectrum. See below. Side lobes, anyone who wants to win a cake? The Gaussian window is the only shape that we can consider seriously as a candidate for the analysis window. To see why I do that. They then say, we include these other window shapes only for pedagogical purposes and because the Hanning and Hamming windows have traditionally been used by other programs before computers were as fast as they are now. A spectrogram is computed twice as fast with those other ones. Several other programs still use these inferior window shapes, and you are likely to run into people who claim that the Gaussian window has disadvantages. We promise such people a large cake if they can come up with sounds that look better with Hanning or Hamming windows than with a Gaussian window. All right, let's keep rolling here. So remember the spectrum? Well, let's meet Cepstrum. If you just reverse the order of the first four letters of spectrum, you get Cepstrum. If we keep that K sound with that CE right there, Cepstrum. So a spectrum is a separation of the waveform into a frequency domain, right? So for example, on the bottom left of this screen, I have a waveform. I have time on the x-axis right there. And I have amplitude on the y. And if I were to make a spectrum here, I would have frequency on the x. And well, here I have a power. The power, it's like a power reading of the different frequencies here in kilohertz. So 1,000 hertz right there, 2,000, etc. And you can take the log of this. If you take the log of it, it'll kind of smooth out the peaks, like the outliers, like these really tall peaks on this second display here. We take the logarithm of those values, we get a smoother thing here. And then if we do Fourier transform on that, we can get what's called a Cepstrum. And it is another way of highlighting different parts of the sound signal. Okay. And so yeah, the power spectrum down here, the second one, gives info, especially regarding the identity of vowels, but it's not very intuitive. So we take a logarithm, which is this third one here, and emphasizes acoustic features perceptible to humans. And right, it's a periodic harmonic peaks and valleys corresponding to the human vocal tract. Now, suppose we do a Fourier transform on this, another Fourier transform on that. We end up with this. We get what's called a Cepstrum. And you can see that the fundamental frequency here is this big spike here at about 7,000 milliseconds in. Yeah, they changed the name of frequency to Kennfrequenz. I'm not even sure how to pronounce that. You can see they changed the name. Oh wait, I'm sorry, my face is in the way of that. Let me put my face right there. So right down in here, right? Anyway, they changed the order of frequency as well right there. Let's take a look at this little, just real quick. Here's a Wikipedia article about what Cepstrums are. Let me move myself back to there. So in Fourier analysis, the Cepstrum is the result of computing an inverse Fourier transform of the logarithm of the estimated signal spectrum. That's why I kind of showed you with those four plots in the previous slide. The method is a tool for investigating periodic structures in frequency spectra, the plural of spectrum. Right, getting into Latin plural here. The power Cepstrum has applications within the analysis of speech, human speech. So if you want to take a look at that article, go ahead and take some time to look at that, or at least skim it. Okay. So speech production in humans. Let's talk about that. So we have airflow from the lungs, right? That's usually how, that's not usually, that's how we speak. We have air coming out of our lungs. It goes through this, the vocal folds, right? And there's some vibration, or either full vibration, or there can be, a smaller level of degree of vibration, or no vibration at all with voiceless sounds, right? And so what you get out of there is what we can look here at the source spectrum. We have the source, where we have frequency here on the x-axis, 1,000 hertz, 2,000, 3,000 hertz, etc., and the source amplitude, right? So the lower frequencies are usually louder than the higher frequencies. And that passes through three cavities: our pharyngeal cavity, that is the throat above the vocal folds and the Adam's apple, so the throat above that point. Also through our mouth, the oral cavity, as well as the nasal cavity. So those three cavities, as well as the position of the tongue and teeth, and the way you use your velum, the back soft palate of your throat, of your mouth, right? All of that goes to modulate the sound and add resonance and formants and harmonics, like we talked about, right? And so that comes up and causes different peaks in the frequencies to happen. And so that's kind of a filter. And then you come up and the output you get is the combination of these two. So you get kind of this, what looks like a spectrum, right? The output spectrum, where we have these peaks and different like powers or amplitudes at different frequencies here in the top right of my screen. Okay. So the spectrum at source modulated by filter functions, and you get this output spectrum here at the top. Another important concept is the male scale. Male is based on the word melody. Human hearing is not equally sensitive to all frequency bands. We're less sensitive to higher frequencies, roughly above 1,000 hertz. And so what we want to do, a good idea at least, is to simulate human speech perception or hearing by recoding the wave into a male scale. And so you're taking information here and kind of spreading it out. At the lower frequencies, you're kind of spreading them out into larger intervals here on the male spectrum or male scale. And you're taking more information at the higher and putting them, kind of squishing them down into equal intervals here on the male scale. Here's a Wikipedia article that has some more information if you'd like to look at it. Right, like I just said, the male scale, after the word melody, is a perceptual scale of pitches judged by listeners to be equal in distance from one another. Okay, good. Here's the mathematical formula to change those frequencies into a male scale. It's not crazy. It's just a little bit of math there. You just use Python or R or something to do that math. And it's pretty simple to get it. So the idea is that, again, we perceive less at the higher end, so we should really beef up the higher end so we can hear better. So here's a hertz scale, and here's the male scale with this curve there. So that's what a male scale is, and we'll see that in speech processing. Another great idea is to apply the male filter bank or male scale processing to the spectrum. Right, so we know the spectrum displays information in a frequency domain. We can process each spectral component separately via male filter, male scale filtering. And now we have a spectral vector of numbers. And one more step is we can take the logarithm of that vector. And so we go from a waveform, do a Fourier transform, like a discrete Fourier transform, get a spectrum, and then pull out each component or each kind of peak and do some further processing, end up with the male filter output, and even do a log of that. So we don't need to know the details here. We don't want to get into the weeds. The idea is this. You take a speech signal. You may perhaps do some pre-emphasis to boost the higher frequencies. You do some windowing. Here's the icon that is sometimes used for windowing of some sort as you're analyzing. You do a discrete Fourier transform or a fast one or a Fourier transform there. Also send down here to energy. And you have a mel filter bank. Take the log, and you end up with what are called mel frequency cepstral coefficients, or MFCC. Okay, and it's just simply a set of numbers. It's simply values, a vector of values that are used a lot in speech applications, speech processing included. So again, we don't have to get into the weeds here on all of this, but just the idea is that we're taking a sound and we're converting it down to a set of numbers. And the delta features, and this tells us how the speech is changing, as well as the rate of change. And it gets into calculus, and we're not going to get into calculus, but just so you're aware, there's math happening here, some serious math, including differential calculus. Okay. So we get a delta feature, which tells us if there's change. And then that tells us the first derivative, using some calculus terminology here, tells us whether it's increasing, flat, or decreasing the sound signal. And then we take the second derivative, which is the derivative of the first, and that tells us the rate of change. Again, this gets into calculus stuff, and again, we don't need to get into what exactly happens, nor even the math, but just simply be aware that, yeah, there's some serious math happening here to take a speech signal and reduce it down to numbers. So looking at the delta and the double delta, it's a derivative in order to obtain temporal information, change and rate of change. So up here we have the MFCCs, right? And then we take the first derivative, or the first delta, which is a Greek letter used for change, often abbreviation for change. And we take the second derivative, which is a derivative of the first, and get the second, or the double delta. And so in the end, we end up with a set of numbers, like I said. And it's interesting that we can represent continuous speech as a set of features. And again, this, for example, with ASR, automated speech recognition, we do those steps like I mentioned: pre-emphasizing speech, windowing, converting to spectral and cepstral representations, separating out the components, mapping them to features. Then we end up with those numbers, the MEL frequency cepstral coefficients, and those are often used in speech applications like automated speech recognition. There are some other ones like the LPC that we saw previously. So it's just the end result. The take-home message here on the bottom of this slide is that we end up with a set of numbers that we can do machine learning on, for example, and create models to do automated speech recognition and other speech applications. So we end up, for example, we can end up with 39 different numbers for a 25 millisecond slice of sound that typify or get at the features of that sound. And so that's what I'm explaining here, that we have 12 MFCC features and 12 delta features, and then 12 double delta that are the derivative of those there. And then we have one energy feature, one delta energy feature, and one double delta energy feature. So we add up to 39, for example. And there are libraries that can do this. So Librosa is a Python library, Python package for music and audio analysis. It provides the building blocks necessary to create music information retrieval systems. Cool. Python speech features is another Python package. Common speech features for ASR, automated speech recognition, including MFCCs, MEL frequency cepstral coefficients, and filter bank energies. Okay, good. PyTorch obviously is a general machine learning package in Python. OpenSmile does this stuff, but does not assume Python. I think it's just a command line. If I remember correctly, it's just a command line interface. So I have some links there to software, and Pratt can do this as well. You'll learn how to do this in Pratt. I think you only get 24 features out rather than 39 in this example here out of Pratt. So here's a graphical summary. We have a raw waveform signal up here, right? We have amplitude over time, and then we do some type of pre-emphasis in order to kind of boost the upper frequencies / reduce the lower frequencies. And then we apply a MEL scale filtering process here in the middle tier, right? Again, so we can emphasize better the higher frequencies. Then we do a log transform the spectrogram, and we end up with the MFCC features, coefficients down here. This is in a graphical representation there. Again, I don't want to get stuck in the weeds here. The basic idea is we're taking sound and we're converting it down to numbers. So back to Pratt. Well, there's several windowing choices like I showed you earlier in this video. And there are several filtering features as well. You can cut off sounds at above or below a certain frequency, or do pre-emphasis or de-emphasis. Modify is the menu that can do that in Pratt. And it can even give you feature sets, vectors of numbers, either MFCC or LPC numbers there. So speech models, we only covered half of the big picture. We looked at kind of the technical, well, we're kind of like at a high level of the weeds. We're not quite down in the weeds, but we're kind of a high level passing over saying, hey, there's a lot of math happening here. Here's some of the steps that we see. We take a waveform, we do some windowing, take out those slices, extract out some features, and we end up with feature vectors like that, right? That can go into a machine learning model. That's the basic idea. We'll look at the other half, linguistic half, next time. So parting thoughts, well, there's lots of math involved. And like I said, I've tried to say just kind of a high level hand waving. Here's my hand waving right now, actually. So yeah, math is involved here, but we don't have to get down into the technical, details of that math. If you would like to, go for it. That would be awesome. These techniques were invented by physicists and engineers and mathematicians. And linguists said, hey, we can apply this to speech processing. And so we can kind of think of this as a black box, but it is good to have some idea of what's actually happening under the hood. Like there's this step. We need to do some pre-emphasis over here. We need to break this down and get some numbers. Just kind of have a general idea of that process. And there's some great resources on machine learning. Here's one. It's a PowerPoint. No, excuse me, this is not the one I was thinking of. Here's a good tutorial. You can take a look at. Pre-emphasis is described there, framing, windowing, okay, for your transform, power spectrum. And here is looks like a book, Intro to Speech Processing at university. And they have information as well. Like it's a whole big old book about the details. And here is here's the one I was thinking of. It's a slide deck here from a while back. So, the Python code is probably not up to date. I know it's not up to date, but just to look at the kind of the high level of what's happening and how the process happens to get down to MFCC values, pre-emphasis and other things in windowing. You can see some of these slides were taken, these pictures were taken from this PowerPoint. Some of the slides I have in this presentation. Okay, so the next lab, to do at least two of the following, use Pratt to analyze speech audio files with various levels of processing. For example, pre-emphasis and spectrum versus cepstrum, MEL spectrogram versus spectrogram, power cepstrum. To draw and visually contrast, write out numeric values to files and inspect the contents. Like do an MFCC analysis and look at the values and see that you have a bunch of vectors of values, of numbers. Floating point numbers, right? Decimal points. And write scripts to execute some of these functions on an input audio file. And even use Pratt to switch pitch tiers from one utterance to another, which is kind of fun to grab the pitch tier from one utterance and slap it on the other utterance, see what it does. And then work with some of the Audacity's filters and vocoder functions I showed you earlier in this video. Just a quick one, quickly. And learn how to use standalone feature extractors like a Python-based or that OpenSmile, which is not Python-based. So that's the idea, to get more experience, to get your hands dirty a bit with kind of the details of the analysis that happens with sound going from a waveform into numbers. All right, see you next time.